Hello, this is Simon in Post. Following some feedback we had on the early release of this episode, I thought I would just add in this quick explanation before we go diving into what I hope you will find to be another great episode of Atypical. This is the first in a number of episodes we hope to do throughout the season, where we get to talk to people across the atypical community, be they neurodivergent or LGBTQ, or otherwise, about subjects of particular interest to them. As you'll find out in this episode, our very first person we had is a lovely person called Kuro, who is a graphic designer who came to talk to me all about some of the interesting things going on with AI image generation, and indeed finding a way to replace me with an AI as well. I hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it. As always, all feedback is really important to us, and we look forward to doing another, probably I suppose you might call it more typical episode of Atypical in a couple of weeks' time. Until then, enjoy this episode. Welcome to Atypical, the podcast where we look at life from a more atypical perspective. I'm Simon, he, they, and I'm joined by friend of the show, Kuro. Hello there.
Hello there.
How's it going?
It's going pretty well. I thought that I had a steak dinner tonight and realised only minutes before departing that it was, in fact, tomorrow. Still, at least I didn't actually leave, which means I'm free to record a podcast.
Yes, and do you know what? I'm rather pleased about that because unfortunately, otherwise it would have just been me, and I think nobody needs to just hear 30 minutes of me talking about, anything, let's be honest here. So it does mean
I would like to lodge my strenuous objection to that concept, but we can move on for the purposes of the podcast.
We absolutely can. So yes. So thank you so much for joining me today, Kuro. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself before we launch into today's topic?
Of course. So I'm Kuro. I'm a graphic designer and I suppose artist. I generally enjoy creativity. I like writing, dabbling in it. I'm interested in new technologies, though I admit I am something of a cynic about the ways that people will use them. So, for example, AI, which has, boundless possibilities when it comes to streamlining creativity, but also is currently in the midst of being used quite unethically by particular parties, using living artists' bodies of work and, basically defying them to sue them because, it's not been officially litigated, even if, it is somewhat a matter of settled law. It's these specific cases have never been viewed by a judge, and the question of whether a judge would know what the hell they were talking about is another one entirely.
Yes.
I mean, a number of artists that I follow online are, either very excited about the possibilities, which I admit is in the minority, whereas the majority are fairly irked about the fact that there are people who are saying, well, I decided that I wanted to take this artist's things and I dare him to litigate about it. Or, it's not terribly pleasant. And there was the people who have very little empathy for the fact that artists may slave away for years on creating a style only for, effectively Silicon Valley people to sweep in and attempt to recreate them using a machine that can spit things out, tens of images every minute, as opposed to spending hours of, or years of labor to get to that point, which is on, from one perspective, this is, making the bar to creating art a lot lower. I've heard the argument from, I believe, Linus Bowman that it is, as with the advent of the camera, previously portrait painting was the thing when it came to capturing images of people. And of course, when the camera came along, it didn't kill painting, it didn't kill portraiture, but it did have to shift into a new paradigm. But like the fact that, democratizing art is one thing, but I mean, I think that Linus Bowman's quite prescient prediction was that the current state of AI art will do some particular things, which is it will make ideating a lot easier. It will kill stock image companies or greatly reduce their market share because you can now generate a novel image for your article as opposed to having to use the same old picture of shopping trolleys if you're writing about, consumer affairs. So there are aspects of the industry which will be very affected. And, don't make any mistake about this. This will ruin some people's livelihoods, and that's not great. But I think there are two different conversations here, one of which is people are concerned because they need to make a livelihood, which
Yes.
obviously is, the fact you have to work to live is, I think, an issue in and of itself. And were that resolved, there would still be people who are quite pissed off about the fact that their art is being effectively stolen, or actually stolen, in order to train machines to recreate their style, if not the actual specifics of their art, which is, intellectual property theft.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
So these are two different conversations, yeah.
I think we almost have to go up a level here and sort of talk about how these AI generators work.
Yes, I mean, I've been poking at the idea of both DALL-E 2, which I got quite an early invite to, which is a fairly sophisticated network. Obviously, DALL-E uses a neural network, which I believe you've discussed previously in an earlier episode.
In episode 7, yes, we briefly touched upon it. Yes, because of course you provided me with some information about it, which was very helpful.
Yes, so I think my rough explanation may have been that you train a machine which learns on models of thousands, or in these cases hundreds of thousands or millions of images, each of which have text associated with them. Although there are, I believe, some experiments with more recent things that don't have any specific, like they've not been labeled up. It's more general, and it sort of draws things from entirely first principles. So in this case, let's say, as the very basic explainer, that you might have 1,000 pictures of something that has been labeled in plain text as a koala, and then 1,000 pictures of something that has been labeled as a motorbike. I don't know why I keep coming back to that example, but I do. And from that, it looks at the commonalities in the koala images and gets an idea of what the koala dimension looks like. And it does the same for motorcycles. And it may also observe the things that are, commonalities beyond the motorcycles themselves. It doesn't know what a motorcycle is if it looks at the image. It just sees the image as a whole. But it might often notice that frequently motorcycles are being ridden. So if you ask it to draw a koala on a motorcycle, it might naturally put the koala onto the motorcycle because that's what motorcycles do, and koalas often cling.
That's absolutely fascinating. Thank you for that. So the koalas and the motorcycles, I don't think I've ever heard it described quite that way before.
The interesting thing about motorcycles and koalas is that Microsoft Azure a few years ago was trained up on computer vision, which is the idea that you could feed it an image and it would say, well, in this image there is a picture of a sheep, and it would say we have 99% confidence there is a sheep in this picture. And of course you would you give it a small training data set, and then it would come back and say, are all these pictures sheep? And you'd say, yep, that seems fine, these are sheep. And over time it will get more and more refined. However, the thing about sheep is that someone then fed a picture of some sheep standing in a tree feeding on its branches. And Microsoft Azure looked at this and said, these are clouds, clearly, because
they're big fluffy things,
in the, against the sky. Whereas previously, Azure got, reams of images of sheep, but they were all standing in fields. So, machines don't see like people. They don't see at all. They just recognize collections of similar pixels, which makes it, there are some things that machines do very well, which, crunching vast amount of data is one of them. But recognizing things is a fairly sticky problem that only now are we sort of properly grappling with. And even then there are unforeseen issues where, you can say, please give me this to DALL-E or to a neural network, and it will give you something that may, completely surprise you. In some respects, that could be a very good thing, because you can say, I want a business card of a teddy bear underwater, and it will come back, it'll give you I think nowadays it gives you 4 examples for DALL-E 2, and they may be something that you would never have thought of, which makes it very good for ideation if you're thinking about logos or, brand missions. That's excellent. But at the same time, the thing about it is that every time it delves into the latent space of teddy bears and water and business cards, it may locate the same coordinates, but will come back with an entirely new dream from this latent space.
I see. Right.
So each time it will be novel, which is a good thing. But on the other hand, you can't say, could you just tweak this bit? And, it won't quite understand that. Now, DALL-E does have some workarounds to this where you can feed in an extant image and basically erase part of it and say, regenerate the image, but just this bit. So you might hate the fact that the teddy bear has, black soulless eyes and you want to make it look more friendly, which you could do. But again, this is sort of a workaround to the fact that neural networks are very much a black box where you can't look at the process. You can't say this is how it got there beyond looking at it resolving from fuzzy pixels as Midjourney does, which you basically start with noise, and from there it works as a GAN where you've got an antagonist network that's looking at what it's drawn. So it presents the cloud of fuzzy pixels, and I need to look up the proper term from this, GAN. An adversarial network, that's the one. So the
adversarial network. That does sound.
Yeah, so in this situation, you've got effectively one network that says you've asked it to draw a sheep again, and it comes up with just a cloud of noise, and the adversary looks at it and says, no, that doesn't look like a sheep to me. So it tries again, another generation. It goes for the bits that the adversary said, yeah, that bit looks a bit more like a sheep. So it tries again, resolving around those details. And maybe it gives you like a big white blob. And it's the adversary said, yeah, but where are the legs? So it will keep going and refining over generations and generations until from this cloud of pure noise, it will come back with a sheep. Or something that looks quite like a sheep when you don't look too closely.
And I think, yes.
The thing about networks is that once you look closely, you realize that it is, in fact, just a collection of pixels. You can keep refining, but it will just still be, not quite right. I was helping a friend with a dissertation and generating a number of prompts for them. And sometimes it would look, completely flawless, and then other times it would look like the dog from The Thing, where it sort of is just a bit off.
So there are different systems that are used for building up these images. Some of them are based on just trying to understand the mixture of light and dark pixels against a plain text tag that says this is a tree, this is a koala, this is a motorcycle, and others use a deeper learning algorithm to build up and refine.
Yes. I mean, fundamentally, most of these algorithms are, transformers, I suppose, which is sort of natural language processors that basically try to get something from one point to another, sort of fixing themselves as they go by saying these bits of the data are significant, these bits aren't. And as you get bigger and bigger data sets, they get better and better at saying these are, the language model that DALL-E uses is distinct from the actual the GPT-3, which is a generative pre-trained transformer. So I guess it is a transformer model. It's these things are so they're quite messy when you're talking about going from natural language, where I say, please give me a picture of a koala riding a motorcycle, and the process of it interpreting that. And then if you add on to the end of it in the style of, Simon, it will, or a preschooler, as the case may be, it will entirely reinterpret that based on the new dimensions. Between the art.
But the best way to think about, if I came to you as a graphic artist and said, "Can you please draw me a koala riding a motorcycle?" I'm going to get something that's sort of unique and probably will look like a koala on a motorcycle. But if I was put it into one of these, that is also true of generative networks, isn't it? The thing about it that's difficult is that you can't then say, "Oh well, I do like that." But the issue with clients, effectively, when they request something, is that clients don't know what they want. So there is already an art springing up of the people who can properly phrase the prompts that go into DALL-E in order to get out the results that you like. So it's quite possible there'll be a burgeoning industry of people saying, well, I can speak with, I am the oracle, I can interpret the language that needs to go into DALL-E in order for you to get out what you want. Okay.
But at the same time, I think that there will be some people who say, well, I don't need an artist to sort of interpret my prompt. I know what I want. I want this logo of my sports team to be an octopus holding a radish on a purple background. And you type that in and you get something out that looks fine. And it will be fine. But quite often, it would benefit you to then take that octopus holding a radish on a purple background to an actual designer who can then take it, the refining stage, or they could say, look, I don't think this is a very good octopus holding a radish.
No.
Maybe have another go at that, or I can.
Yes.
But, it can't be underestimated how good it is for that ideation stage, which is something that, as I've mentioned, people are concerned about.
Yeah, and so I guess that's one of the things I'm quite interested in understanding. Actually, is what will something like this do to the creative industries? Because we already spoke about how a number of artists are less than enamored about the fact that people are feeding their creations into these systems in order that people can then, I suppose, fundamentally undermine that creative process. Where people could feed into one of these AI generators, show me a koala riding a motorcycle in the style of Van Gogh. And I think, but when it's living artists and creators whose work is being used to regenerate this, is that then a threat to our creative industries?
I think at a very fundamental level, it's unethical, because not understanding the importance, the value of originality, of people being able to be creative, is something that I would say that there are certain people who are not necessarily spearheading these projects, but are taking advantage of them, really don't appreciate. They're more, forgive me for sounding conspiratorial, but the fact that the right wing has traditionally seen the creative industries as quite a sort of lefty boho bastion, I think there are probably some people who are salivating over the idea that they can take back the more visual arts.
Right. And I suppose that's part of the bias and limitations of these things, isn't it? Because a lot of these things are built on existing models, and they're trained on unfiltered data from the internet. It sort of generates images that could be stereotypical against minority groups. I mean, I put in, show me pictures of nurses, and virtually all of them came back as female. And when I asked for doctors, they all came back as male. When I
and when you ask about autism, it generally produces images of children. I think that is a slightly distinct question. The biases that are reproduced is definitely, obviously, an issue. It is, I think, slightly distinct from the idea that, let's say, the far right might use it in an effort to sort of co-opt or, just take the creativity of the left. Again, this is quite maybe a bit paranoid of me, but nevertheless.
No, we're fine. And just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not looking for you. To slightly misquote Heller there. But yes, I mean, I guess that's actually quite an interesting one. I mean, sort of how they could use it to, I suppose, hijack the creative industry and turn it towards a political end.
I mean, the other thing that's interesting is that already people like OpenAI are placing restrictions on what you can use DALL-E 2 for, which is the fact that they have a list of terms of service, which some of them I think are fair enough, in that they're aiming to prevent the proliferation of deepfakes by saying that you can't use a real person's name. Right. So if I were to type in Barack Obama visit a koala on a motorcycle, it would say, that this is a strike. You cannot do this. If you continue to attempt to circumvent our content policy, we will ban you. However, the issue with this is that for certain things, it can create a chilling effect. For example, there are some things where I've been quite surprised that it warned me against using them, which make me leery of attempting similar things in the future. The specific example I can think of is when I ask for, and this is, I think, says more about me and the things my friends were requesting at the time than it does necessarily about DALL-E, but they asked for a picture of a twink in a nightclub. Now, in gay culture, a twink is a young man, and it said, no, this is a sexual term. You can't use it. If you keep using terms like this, we will ban you. The thing is, it doesn't have a list of banned terms, for which I think is fairly, reasonable, but also it doesn't really specify, because the specifics on its content policy page is that you're not allowed to have anything that portrays nudity, sexual acts, sexual services, or content otherwise meant to arouse sexual excitement. Now, I would argue that
I mean,
a twink
that's
is a phenotype of man, is that he
Yes.
is a young man, in the same way that a bear or not necessarily sexual, they're just a gay subculture. But the
Yes.
fact that they can say you're not allowed to ask for anything relating to any of these gay subcultures, I would say, does produce a chilling effect where I am more wary of doing anything similar in the future. And it also means that, in some ways, who are they to make the call? Yeah.
Precisely.
It is
Who decided that is a term that cannot be used in a non-sexual way? Because many people, especially within sort of gay and queer communities, will often use these terms not in a sexualized manner, but just as an explanation or a description of a particular type of person.
On the other hand, I get that they are banning self-harm, hate speech,
which is a good thing.
Which is fine. Illegal activity, political, which, public and personal health, deception, spam, violence, shocking, and sexual. Now, it is an interesting one because shocking specifically mentions bodily fluids, obscene gestures, or other profane subjects that may shock or disgust, which I would say is quite a wide remit. And of course,
that is a very wide remit.
OpenAI is free as a private company to change their terms at any moment. They could tomorrow say that you're not allowed to request any pictures of koalas on motorcycles, and there would be nothing we could do about it. But it's just interesting what they do and don't allow. It's also interesting that they say, you've got to respect the rights of others, don't use anyone else's content. When DALL-E 2's image base, they haven't released their source code, but they have used 400 million pairs of images with text captions that were scraped from the internet. And scraping is doing a bit of legwork there, because what it means is they were not respecting the rights of others when they created DALL-E 2. So, one rule for me, another for thee.
Well, indeed, that does seem somewhat concerning, I suppose, if they're applying slightly opaque standards here.
Yeah, I mean, at the same time, I appreciate that if you try to upload a picture of a face, a photo of a face, they will recognize it as a face and say you can't do this. Which, when it comes to deep fakes, revenge porn by their current terms wouldn't be allowed to be generated. But I'm sure you could portray someone doing something that looks on a plausible first glance like something that would be plausibly embarrassing. So it's an interesting discussion, and I'm sure that it will continue to develop as ethics continue to unspool and safety. I mean, Google has released, or not released, as the case may be, Imogen, which is their own AI, which is very similar on many levels to DALL-E. It can do text, which is something that DALL-E's diffusion model can't. If you request DALL-E to produce a sign that says, Wisconsin on it, it will produce Wisconsin, like total garbage. Quite amusing garbage.
It can't see words and letters.
Yes, but Google have basically said we're not releasing our model publicly. Because out of fear for abuse, we are not, it won't be accessible to the general public. Whereas DALL-E is currently rolling out to they've just unrolled their waitlist of 1 million individuals by entering into a beta phase. So
wow,
it is democratizing access, as they would say. But yes, we shall see how it goes.
Well, indeed. I think, actually, one which I think might be quite interesting to look at, and some which we can share on a primarily audio medium of a podcast, is the text generation one. So, because I mean, I think these have been around slightly longer than the image generators, haven't they? I mean, there's plenty of AI to write things.
I did think you were going to say the text-to-speech generators, which are also interesting in their own right.
Yes, text-to-speech is an interesting one. I mean, I do use those for my own help sometimes. Just to when I have a large block of text, I use something like Read and Write. Because that's a nice dyslexia tool, and it'll then read out my emails to me or something if I'm having a day where I'm just going. And, it's a very useful piece of software for anyone who's got dyslexia, by the way, so I'd recommend that. But no, I wasn't really thinking of those. Although now that you mention them, we were talking previously about audio fakes as well, sort of AI audio processing and so forth, to talk about how you can change voices and things. Can you tell us a bit more about those?
So these audio fakes don't require terribly large data sets. They're not currently very good, But these things are in their nascent stages, and think of where they will be in a couple of stages down the line. The one we're specifically talking about is called altered AI, that allows you to change your voice to a given number of custom voices that the company has come up with, but you can also train your own data set, which means that if you had, say, hours of people talking on a podcast, you could curate that, cut out, let's say, Simon's voice. The example we're using in this situation is a random person called Simon, and thereby create your own artificial podcast host who could say whatever you liked.
So that's when we get into Slur's chat.
I can't admit I've ever been in Slur's chat before, but all right.
No, but that opens up to, again, like deep fakes, that opens up to enormous potential for misuse, doesn't it? It means that actually you could take my voice, for example, run it through the processor, and then have me say all sorts of things about how we should get rid of certain types of people, or I support certain political views, or other things, and for people who wouldn't necessarily know me, that might sound quite realistic and could potentially cause significant problems.
Not only is it an issue when it comes to perhaps fraudulent voicemails or phone calls, which could be even spoken in real time using this augmented AI.
Doesn't sound very very James Bond.
Yes, it's not as convincing as a pre-trained model, but if you're through a poor phone line and you're requesting to have your pension moved to a different location, but the voice print is correct, I think this is a bit Mission Impossible, I agree, but nevertheless. But also in combination with the visual deepfaking, where, there was a famous example from a couple of years ago where a voice clip of Barack Obama was transplanted onto a different video clip of him, and all the lips sync up and he blinks fairly convincingly. And if you weren't alerted, then you probably wouldn't notice that it was fake.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, let's talk about OpenAI's Playground instead of OpenAI's DALL-E, which is their text API.
Yes, so tell us about Playground, because I think these are slightly more mature AIs, aren't they? The ones that can generate text from a set thing. And I certainly know that they're in quite a lot of use in advertisement industries and so forth. There's plenty of AIs that will paraphrase and rewrite articles. And even you can just feed them a few.
Much like Copilot with their rewriting code. These days, you can't scroll through Instagram without seeing 100 adverts for you never have to write any copy again. Instead, you'll have quite subpar copy written by an AI. So, for example, I just prompted Playground to tell me a story about a koala riding a bicycle, as opposed to a motorcycle. And it gave me a very brief one, because I restricted its maximum length for 256 characters for the purposes of
this
not boring the listeners of the podcast too much. Once upon a time, there was a koala who loved to ride his bicycle. He would pedal around his neighborhood and wave to all of his friends. One day, he decided to ride his bicycle to the store to get some ice cream. When he got there, he saw a sign that said "No koalas allowed." He was so sad that he didn't get to enjoy his favorite treat. So there we see a koala experiencing a microaggression.
Okay.
Which is interesting. It's also interesting the koala is male.
Yes.
It's interesting that the koala is performing something that, he's riding a bicycle, he's getting an ice cream, he's learning about apartheid. It's an interesting story, I would say.
It's, yes, potentially quite concerning in some places, but yes, absolutely. So,
do you want to give me a sentence to generate a story off?
Oh, go on then. I know, because we're on Atypical, get us a new opening script for Atypical, the podcast about being neurodivergent.
Right, I'm just going to read this to you, as I'm going to take over as the podcast host. Welcome to Atypical, the podcast about being neurodivergent. Every week we explore the unique challenges and perspectives of people living with conditions like ADHD, autism, OCD and Tourette's. We'll be talking to experts and everyday people about what it's like to live with a neurodivergent condition and how we can better support and understand each other. Neurodivergent yourself, or just want to learn more about these often misunderstood conditions, join us on Atypical.
That's better than I wrote. I'm going to throw in the towel now. It's going to be you, Craig, and an AI generator from now on. But that sounds almost quite convincingly good, doesn't it? And so where
I think
all of that
what we need to do is train a bot on your voice so we can have the intro to the podcast at the very beginning read out this specific script in your voice. Perhaps a little bit ambitious, but still.
Well, no, because now we can deep fake voices. I can just get a celebrity to read it for me every single week.
Indeed. Actually, that might not be the worst. I think there's a try it for free option on Altered, but it does want you to
crumbs.
pay over 100 quid, so perhaps not.
Yes, perhaps not. No, I mean, this podcast already costs me money. I don't particularly want to pour more into it.
That's fair.
Yes, I thought so. Go on, then, let's give it something else. Let's ask it something slightly absurd. Ask it to explain why the sky is green.
Very well. The sky is green because of the sunlight reflecting off of the particles in the atmosphere. So it can come out with something that's quite plausible, but something that is also entirely, on its face, untrue.
Yes. I think it's quite interesting because I've been looking at some of these things in the past, because there's a number of, like you said, people saying, "Oh, I'll never write ad copy ever again," and so forth. And I've found whole systems that claim, I should say, to be able to write essays and to completely change anything you submit to it, so that you can get around things like Turnitin if you're just copying and pasting stuff for a university essay, for example.
Indeed.
Part of me wishes I had that when I was at university, but no, we had to do it the old-fashioned way of actually reading and understanding a thing before we wrote about it.
For shame.
I know, it's dreadful being old, isn't it? But I certainly, there's a whole bunch which plug into things like Google Ads, for example, and Facebook Ads, which is probably the two most commonly seen forms of online advertising. And sort of by just inputting 3 or 4, I suppose, keywords to describe the thing you're trying to sell, they can create some very realistic sounding ad copy. I mean, let's throw another thing in there for the podcast, for the listeners. Ask it to explain what happened at the London beer flood.
Very good. I would just say the issue I have with things like AI copy generators is that typically they will put out, even if the model is quite large, they will tend to put out something that sends, over time, will trend towards being definitionally quite generic. Which I suppose is
quite specific questions of it then.
Again, it comes back to prompt sculpting, yeah. Right, here we go. The London beer flood was an accident that occurred on October the 17th, 1814. Could you check that for me, Simon? When a large vat at the Moe and Company brewery ruptured, causing other vats in the same building to collapse as well. The resulting wave of beer swept through the streets of London, killing 8 people. Could we have a fact checked there?
8 people were killed on the 17th of October, 1814, when a 22-foot tall wooden vat of fermenting porter burst, and the pressure of the escaping liquid did indeed dislodge the valve of another vessel and destroyed several more, which caused 580,000 to somewhere around 1.5 million litres worth of beer to go sweeping through the streets. A slum called St Giles Rookery.
Was it indeed at Moe & Co.?
It was at Moe & Co., yes. So what it's done here is it's scraped, I don't know, Wikipedia or something to just get that and turn it into a
novel phrasing, which is quite interesting.
Yes. And so that, I think, is where I suspect we're going to see more use of it in people effectively just rewriting something someone else has written, but without the thought process involved behind actually understanding and regenerating. But it's quite interesting how that has pulled out all the salient points and, as you say, has novelly slightly rewritten it to that point, to that extent.
I've just asked it to explain in detail what happened at the London beer flood with reference to the consequences. It occurred when a vat of beer at the Moe & Co. brewery ruptured, causing other vats to rupture in a domino effect. The flood of beer killed 8 people and injured several others. The brewery was located in the St Giles district of London, which was a densely populated area at the time. The Moe & Company brewery was one of the largest in London, and the vat that ruptured held over 3,500 barrels of beer. The flood caused extensive damage to the surrounding area, and the Moe & Company brewery was eventually closed. So it had an appreciation for the results.
Yeah,
because I asked it to consider them.
That's quite interesting.
Yeah, I think there is a certain charm to playing around with this sort of thing, and I would be a lot less worried if we didn't need to worry about money.
Well, it would be rather wonderful, wouldn't it? I know. Ask it to write us a award acceptance speech for a podcast about autism. Bearing in mind, of course, Atypical is about far more than just that, but I'm autistic and I'm doing a podcast about it, and I want my award ceremony acceptance speech to be written for me because I'm lazy.
I'm here reading for the role of Simon. Thank you so much for this award. It means a lot to us to be recognised for our work on autism. We started this podcast because we wanted to create a safe space for people on the autism spectrum to share their experiences and connect with others. We feel so lucky to have been able to do that and to have met so many amazing people through this journey. Thank you to our listeners for your support. We wouldn't be here without you. And a big thank you to our families and friends who have always believed in us. We're so grateful for this award and for everything that's happened because of this podcast. We hope that we can continue to make a difference in the lives of people on the autism spectrum and help create a more understanding and inclusive world.
See, now that actually sounds quite reasonable, doesn't it?
Well,
I mean, it's
it
not
sounds
quite what
plausible.
It
because
does, and that's the scary thing.
Because it sounds like every acceptance speech, because it's scraped from any number of acceptance speeches and
Which
put
are
them
all very
together.
generic.
Well, exactly, because I do want to try something that's really tricky for it, that it wouldn't know how to handle. But it's quite
How to
difficult
explain
when
to my
you have...
parents that I'm adopted.
Because when you have the sum total of all being able to write anything into a blank box, your mind goes blank.
It does.
Well, this one's fun. It's given me this. It's difficult to know how to start this conversation. You may want to begin by telling your parents that you've always known that you were adopted, but recently been thinking about it more and have some questions. You might say something like, I know you've always been honest with me about my adoption, but I'm feeling like I need to know more. Can we talk about it? If your parents are hesitant to talk about it, you can try to reassure them that you just want to better understand your story, and you're not looking for them to give you any answers that they do not have. You might say something like, I know you might not have all the answers to my questions, but I would appreciate anything you can tell me. I just want to better understand who I am. It's also possible your parents might be uncomfortable talking about the circumstances of your adoption. In this case, you can try to gently probe for more information without being too pushy. You might say something like, I know it might be difficult to talk about, but can you tell me anything about my birth parents or why they chose to adoption? If your parents are still unwilling to talk about it, you might want to consider seeking out professional help to learn more about your adoption story. And you can just about to see the point where eventually, quite often, these text generations begin eating their own tails, and you can get caught in loops where it will just start saying, if this is happening, if this is happening, and it will just sort of
it goes round and
become
round
an
in circles.
Ouroboros. Yeah.
Yes. Well, that's quite interesting because yes, it started off sounding very plausible, even like something somebody would have written to help people to try and understand more about themselves. And then, as you say, it starts to descend into some slightly odd places.
Did you ask me to generate the prompt? Why is the big toe afraid of the rest of the foot?
Yes. Or does it feel self-conscious about being the big toe?
I'm going for the basic one first.
Okay.
The big toe is afraid of the rest of the foot because it is the biggest and most important toe. If something happened to it, the rest of the foot would be in trouble.
I do love the idea of ascribing fear to a limb.
Or is it self-conscious? Let's see what Wisdom Playground has for us. There is no one answer to this question, as it is open to interpretation. Some people might say that the big toe is afraid of the rest of the foot because it is the biggest and most noticeable toe, so it is natural for it to feel self-conscious or anxious around the other toes. Others might say that the big toe is simply the most important toe, and therefore it is natural for it to feel protective or even possessive of the other toes.
So these things are able to come out with some quite plausible
Garbage.
responses. I suppose. Well, yes, but I mean, I suppose they're also built on an even larger data set than the images are.
Yes, it's interesting that along the side of the page it asks for attribution. It asks. It notes that the default model's training data cuts off in 2021, so it might not know about current events, and that you can submit and ask for different models, which is interesting. So you can go
what
for
happens
DaVinci
if you
or
were
Curie
to
or
ask
Babbage.
it?
I have asked what happened after Corbyn rose to power in 2022.
Go on then. What happened after Corbyn rose to power
in 2022? After Corbyn rose to power in 2022, the United Kingdom experienced a period of great prosperity. Under Corbyn's leadership, the country experienced significant economic growth, and poverty and inequality were greatly reduced. Corbyn's government also invested heavily in public services such as healthcare and education, and made progress in tackling climate change. There is still time.
There is still time. Dear listener, we have time.
Maybe that
sounds
was a
like
bad
something
example. We should scrap it.
Yeah, possibly. But it does feel like something that'd be sort of read off of Wikipedia in 10 years' time, doesn't it? Terrifying, these things. But yes. So, what do you see as you work in the creative industries, and you obviously have a great deal of experience using these things. Over the next 2 to 3 years, do you think that they will have a material difference to how, certainly for things like in graphic design and so forth, how the industries will work?
I can say unequivocally yes. I am certain that more and more journalistic and editorial teams and publications will start to use AI images as mastheads or supplementary images, if only because if you're working in the drier industries, sort of corporations where you have quite limited amounts of things that you can use as pictures, you keep returning to the well of stock images, people are going to be leaping at the chance to have things that are more attention grabbing.
Hmm.
The fact is, one of the real benefits, as opposed to stock images, that something that like DALL-E can manage is that it can do abstract concepts as well. So you might ask it to symbolize the feeling of, loneliness when your PPI has been rejected or something, and it might come out with something quite plausible. Whereas the more, every graphic designer knows the doldrums and dread that happens whenever you're having to scroll through 15 pages of Adobe stock to come across, a stock image that looks slightly less like a stock image. So maybe you can use this one.
Whereas if you can come up with something completely novel based on a conceptual idea, that could save a huge amount of time. So I suppose you could actually then use them as a shortcut to give you an idea for somewhere to start. If your client has given you a scope of a thing they want, you can type it into one of these and get a starter for 10.
I think that is something that the more judicious of graphic designers will do. I also think that there are plenty of people who are just going to use it, at its most basic and use the first thing they generate. First thought, best thought. This looks pretty much fine. Let's use that. Whereas recently there was a magazine cover which had an AI image as its cover, and the tagline at the bottom was, "This image took 2 seconds to create." Artist
That's
who made
genius.
it was talking about how it took them hours and hours of refining and changing the prompt and seeing, and over the course of days, refining the process until they had a cover that would do. So, the work behind it may change. It may become quicker to ideate, but for those who are rigorous and want a good result, it will become a tool in their box, much in the same way that a phone camera is something that some people will use. This is a really bad example. Much in the same way that phone cameras now allow you to snap things off the hip, or previously it would have been impossible to even conceptualize of the existence of something like TikTok, which is minute-long
Yes.
videos that you just absorb and then discard like Pringles.
I mean, some of
Whereas,
us remember Vines, but
indeed, but a couple of decades ago, a platform
yes,
like that would have been a complete impossibility just because of the technology. Because
yes,
people
absolutely.
didn't have phones in their pockets. The idea of filming something on, a sort of old Kodak and then uploading it, or whatever the hell it would be, a Sony camera, and then uploading it to a server that would, even just file transfer speeds would have made it an impossibility. So
Yeah, it was just something you wouldn't have done.
exactly. So I just think it is too soon to tell. There will be some dreadful results where whole suites of designers are fired from their jobs by people who are interested in a short-term profit motive, same as it ever was. And there will be people who do
Just
something
to
very
change.
creative. And then there
Yes.
will be the weird, muggy grey area of people who are doing creative things, but they are aping the style of extant living artists who will undoubtedly get very pissed off.
Understandably so, because they're having their own work used without any real.
Yes,
Well,
I do feel like I'm banging the table about that quite a lot, but it does concern me.
I think it's perfectly reasonable to be concerned if you've got people who are using their artistic skills and then their work is being turned into an electronic system that anyone can effectively access and reuse and restyle without any attribution or pay, then it does mean that actually we might see a shrinking in new creative talent.
But at the same time, we might see an upswell of people who are able to just be creative in moments. I think that, again, not to return to the well of Linus Bowman, but he also noted that the idea of the reaction GIF was something that is also quite recent, where you're using a service or you're cropping it yourself to just a couple of seconds from an old TV show, just to sort of say something
Yeah.
in the course of seconds. Pre these services, it would have been very difficult to do and something that people would have had to do bespoke. Nowadays, it's just an off the cuff thing now that is being integrated into messengers. By the same token, he notes that he would not at all be surprised at the advent of the AI reaction image, where you create an entirely new piece of art that has never been seen before and will never be seen again, disposably seconds, that you send to your friends. You have a quick laugh at the idea of a unicorn dancing on its hind legs, and then it disappears into the ether, never to be seen again. I think that is prescient. I think it's probable, and I think it's only a matter of time until Giphy or whoever realizes they can do it.
Yes, and that's I hadn't considered that one before, because I mean, I will often use a GIF in a response to people, because they add a bit more playfulness to the conversation. I hadn't considered actually that you could create a a unique one-off piece of art to explain a concept or a feeling in a more visual
Yes,
medium. And I
I
wonder
am.
if that might actually be quite helpful to people.
Services like Artbreeder allow you to upload a photograph and it will boil it down into where it thinks it is in the latent space. It will say, I think this is probably a guy with glasses, and then allow you to, by saying, I want this to be more smiley, or I want this to have less glasses, or be more blonde, or something, or change the race slightly, or change the, any number of attributes that it has as its optional dimensions.
AI Photoshop, effectively.
Yes, and this is allowing people who don't have an ounce of, artistic creativity or ability, let's say, to start creating. I think that the common thing is for let's say fan fiction authors or maybe Twitter bots to have novel faces on for their characters.
That's yeah. I suppose if you tie that up then with text generators and bots and so forth, you could create a plausible sounding online presence.
I'm absolutely 100% sure there are a number of artists out there who are creating their artificial human product where they'll say, oh, this person got thousands of followers on Twitter and they don't actually exist at all. I fooled you all. But
time to break out the Turing tests.
Indeed, on a more concerning level, it's state actors using fabricated people based on data sets of conversations from fandoms, etc., where they can converse convincingly about, let's say, the latest episode of Gundam, but also can intersperse that with anti-democratic ideas because you can make it spit out something that looks plausible with minimal effort on your end.
Absolutely, and because you're using an AI that's responding very quickly, you can create hundreds and thousands of profiles all saying a similar message and showing similar pictures, but all just different enough to make you go, maybe these are real people who are all just saying the same thing.
I mean, sock puppeting is a tradition as old as time, but the easier it becomes, the more it will happen, sort of by definition.
Right, definitely want the Voight Kampf machine then.
Is there anything else we wanted to cover?
What do you think of the strikes?
I am.
We are a pro-union podcast.
Yes, I fully support, as inconvenient as it may be, but that is rather the point, isn't it?
Well, indeed. I mean, I worked from home today, and I discovered that my internet service provider is a comrade because my internet went down for some hours, which made it rather difficult to work.
Working from your phone, then?
Yes. Luckily, I have a work phone, and I was able to hotspot off of it. So
piggyback, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, you're an artist as well, aren't you? Tell me about your. I understand you have a daily art project. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so for the past 7.5 years, I've been doing something called Year of Days, which you can find on Tumblr at that same self-titled URL, where every single day I do spend half an hour to maybe a couple of hours just doing a different piece of art. Sometimes it might be a picture of a raccoon or a Goya or an El Greco, or I'm weighting heavily towards the sort of classical artists because I'm currently looking at my most recent output, which is from a trip to the Frick and the Whitney. But still, or generally cats and people are the things I seem to default to over time.
I'm looking forward to an axolotl personally, but
yes. I mean, I think you can even find a Simon there somewhere, but we probably will cut that. Yeah, so I mean, I enjoy it. I think it's been very useful. When I started it, I hadn't drawn a couple of years because I was dating someone who was much better at art than me, and I was just not feeling great about it. So I really do recommend just making something every day, and over time you'll just look back at it and be surprised at how much you can remember and how much you've done. I mean, I think it probably says something about me that when I started in 2014, I said I would go for 1 year, and I went over by a couple of days and went, oh, well, drat, I'll have to go for another year then, because it has to be 365 days. Otherwise, that would be wrong. So I did another year, and it sort of kept happening.
1.5 years later.
Exactly. But, it's a wonder I'm subclinical, most likely.
That's another episode. We'll come to that at another time, I'm sure.
No, well, I mean, we could talk about the fact that you're the one who was the one to say, have you ever been diagnosed for ADHD or autism?
Yes, that was an interesting afternoon, wasn't it? It's like sort of spending the afternoon with you. Have you ever considered?
To which the answer was no, not previously.
No. But yeah, I think there's potentially another episode there on recognizing neurodivergent, I suppose, behaviors and traits in other people.
It's the pointing Spider-Man meme.
Yes, I mean, but there might also be a thing where I suppose we get a confirmation bias. We see certain traits and behaviors in people and then think, they must be, when actually it might just be a perfectly normal activity for that person to do. I mean,
Sure, and
stimming
we're always
is the most
inclined
common one.
to universalize our experiences, aren't we?
Yes.
Have you done an episode talking about representations, whether explicit or implicit, of neurodivergent people in media?
We haven't, no. I think we need to do that.
Because there might be some interesting, talking about, I don't know, Hal's Moving Castle or something and saying, well, we see these behaviors that are typical presentations of autism, perhaps, or ADHD or whatever, and how there is discourse around that saying, oh, well, they didn't explicitly say it, so it's not true, which is something that is very familiar to anyone who used to be in the fandoms.
A play that I saw last week in Edinburgh at the Fringe, sort of two gay people with in a relationship and so forth, and within about 10 minutes, I'm like, oh no, both of these characters live in my brain. They're both aspects of my personality. No. I think, yeah, so what we'll do is we'll definitely invite you back when we do representations in the media, because I think you've probably got some quite interesting things to say about that. And it's definitely something we need to do, alongside probably review a few of the more difficult films. There was that Sia one. There's obviously Rain Man and a few others which have representations of neurodivergent people which are probably not entirely fair. Hi, this is Simon in Post. Where we say sing, we do of course mean music. Sorry about that. Back to the podcast.
Yes, we can talk about Sing, and we can be quite angry about Sing. I think that sounds like something that would be great fun.
I think it does, rather. So thank you so very much for joining me. Have a very pleasant week.
And you too, Simon. Thanks.
All right. Bye now.
Bye.